Hello everyone, my name is Madison Downey and I plan on becoming an elementary school teacher. Throughout the following slides, I will describe my vision statement and how it applies to what being culturally aware looks like for teachers of elementary school students. As an educator of elementary school students, I will have a variety of different learners, all coming from different ethnic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. My students will have a variety of different learning styles in which they best absorb content in my classroom. It is my job as their teacher to ensure that I teach the content in a variety of different ways through differentiation and focus on understanding how my students learn best. According to research completed by Dunn, children also should be permitted to work either alone, in pairs, in a small group, or with the teacher as they feel most comfortable while learning. Some of my learners will prefer working alone, whereas others may prefer working in pairs or a group. I will ensure that I provide an assortment of different ways in which my students can learn course content. According to Great Schools Partnership, hidden curriculum consists of the unspoken or implicit academic, social, and cultural messages that are communicated to students while they are in school. At the elementary level, children are absorbing new information everywhere they go, both in and out of the classroom. They will learn about different cultures and even social norms simply by showing up to school each day. In my classroom, hidden curriculum will be incorporated into the environment, the classroom expectations, and my personal teaching style. Students will learn how to effectively work independently as well as collaboratively in my classroom environment. My classroom will have a set schedule and routine that is followed each day. In the book Black Ants and Buddhists, Mary Coey explains that children need a predictable structure and a routine they can learn so they can become more independent learners. This predictable routine will allow students to be prepared for each part of their day and will teach them to learn independently. In my classroom, there will also be no questions or topics that are off limits. According to an article in the Journal of Educational Psychology, classroom environments play an important role in students' motivation, engagement, and achievement in the school. With this in mind, I believe that creating a positive learning environment for my students is very important. As an educator of elementary school students, it is vital that I create a learning environment that is fun, engaging, and comfortable for my students. This learning environment not only encompasses what my classroom will look like from a visual standpoint, but how it feels socially and emotionally as a whole. My classroom environment will embrace all different cultures and backgrounds in both design and practice. It will be a place where dialogue and questions are always encouraged between both my students and myself. My students will feel comfortable and safe coming to me with any questions they may have. In order to foster this positive and encouraging learning environment, I will place my focus on developing meaningful relationships with my students. The physical environment of the classroom can also play a huge role in children's learning outcomes. According to an article by Education Week, in successful learning environments, the spaces themselves are designed to foster student connection. I will incorporate this concept in my classroom through the use of community tables rather than individual desks in order to encourage student connection, engagement, and collaboration. Material culture encompasses many things within a classroom, from the decorations hung on the walls to the types of objects that are used in the classroom setting. According to research done by Johnson, customary, often taken for granted items of public school classroom material culture in part function as a mode for the representation and symbolic transmission of sociocultural ideologies, mythologies, and core value orientations. Some aspects of material culture that I will incorporate into my classroom include classroom expectations and student artwork. By displaying classroom expectations, I will be giving my students a sense of purpose and identity as a whole. Additionally, by displaying student artwork, my students will feel valued and respected in their environment. The achievement gap is used to describe the disproportionate gap of academic performance among groups of students. This is a huge issue in many schools across the United States, and it needs to be addressed. In many classrooms, students are placed in groups of different academic levels and taught separate curriculum or held to a different set of academic expectations than their peers who are at a different achievement level. Although this may seem like a good idea at surface level, these schools are doing their lower achieving students a disservice by not holding them to the same standards as the rest of the class. Research by Burris and Wellner shows that if all students are given the enriched curriculum that high achieving students receive, achievement will rise. In my classroom, all of my students will be held to the same expectations and taught the same curriculum, regardless of their academic level, except of course those students who have an IEP. It is my mission to not let any student of mine slip through the cracks without doing everything I can to provide them equal access to an excellent education. A study done by Brown and Associates found that in schools where a combination of staff, students, families, and community members work together to support student achievement, the outcomes of interest are better. By using a community-based approach in my classroom, I can give my students all of the support they may need from every angle in order for them to succeed and truly thrive academically to close the achievement gap. It is extremely important to me that I keep in mind the different cultural backgrounds my students are coming from and that I understand how this may be affecting their achievement in my classroom. By developing meaningful relationships with my students and their families in order to get a deeper look into their culture, I can better understand their cultural expectations and views on academic success so that I can create a classroom environment that supports them. Another key factor of eliminating cultural bias in my classroom is keeping an open and honest communication between my students. By allowing my students to speak freely and ask questions, I can better understand where they are coming from and will have a more open mind to understanding our cultural differences as a class and how we can use these differences to build a more loving classroom community. Many students who come from different cultural backgrounds have trouble measuring up to the cultural standards or expectations set out by typical American education. This way of viewing culture as a disability helps us as educators better understand how to best support culturally diverse children in their journey to academic success. My goal as an educator is to do everything in my power to understand the different cultural norms and expectations of each of my students. By doing so, I will be able to differentiate my own curriculum and classroom expectations to be more well-rounded to a variety of different cultural backgrounds. Research done by the Journal of Anthropology and Education found that students learn quickly to clue into the established rules of behavior in a given setting in order to avoid offending people in command and suffering the resulting consequences. When students feel as though they cannot express themselves and have to keep their mouths shut in order to avoid offending people of authority, true learning cannot occur. I am inspired to create a comfortable and safe environment where children from all different cultural backgrounds feel welcome to express their opinions and beliefs freely without fear of consequence. Many classrooms across the country are experiencing cultural conflicts due to differing cultural backgrounds being present in the classroom. Each culture has a unique view of the concepts such as discipline, academic success, submission to authority figures, and even body language. When these different cultural views and expectations are all blended together in a mainstream classroom, conflict often occurs if there is no effort to create a classroom that is culturally responsive. Research done by Garcia and Dominguez explains that in order to create a classroom in which culturally and linguistically diverse students can reach their full potential, the learning environment must include features such as high expectations, exposure to academically rich curricula, materials and approaches that are culturally and linguistically responsive and appropriate, use of instructional technologies that enhance learning and emphasis on student-regulated, active learning rather than passive, teacher-directed transmission. In my classroom, it is my goal to emulate these features in order to create the most positive learning environment possible for children of all different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. As an educator of young students, pop culture will be an integral part of my students' everyday lives, from the television shows and movies they watch to the music they listen to. A study done by Fishman explains that the power of some works of popular culture resides in the help they provide in dealing with those shadowed, non-rationalized sides of the insecure human identity. When tough topics arise in regards to pop culture, including racism, social class, cultural differences, and so forth, it is my role and responsibility to ensure that my students feel safe and comfortable discussing these topics in the classroom environment. After watching any films in my classroom, it is my responsibility to address any underlying issues that were presented through the form of pop culture with my students. Rituals are an important element of every classroom environment. Research completed by Kapfer explains that rituals constitute complex symbolic arrangements combining actions and ideas into a coherent and overall consistent order that at once relates to and finds its relevant in everyday practices, yet stands above and apart from these practices. Because these rituals create a consistent order in the classroom's everyday practices, It is important to both establish and identify core rituals that will be impactful to your learning environment. Although core rituals may be enforced school-wide, each classroom may have their own set of these routines and practices on a daily basis. Research done by Isaac shows that rituals have symbolic power, in the sense that aspects of our behavior, such as our ways of speaking, walking, dressing, and accessorizing, all carry potential meanings beyond the immediate context. With this in mind, it is my responsibility to understand the role of my behaviors have on our daily rituals as a class. I am inspired to create positive and uplifting classroom rituals that foster empowerment in my students and anyone else who walks into my classroom. The Journal of Teacher Education defines culturally responsive teaching as using the cultural characteristics, experiences, and perspectives of ethnically diverse students as conduits for teaching them more effectively. By implementing culturally responsive teaching into my classroom, I can help all of my students feel more safe and comfortable within my classroom walls. This will also help each and every one of my young students have a better understanding of the cultures that differ from their own. A recent study by Masum and Associates suggests that the school's academic curriculum should embrace multicultural understandings in their content and context, which can be done by providing second language courses and integrating multicultural perspectives in different subjects. As a teacher of young students, it is vitally important that I weave culturally responsive teaching into my curriculum because it will shape the knowledge and perspectives of my students' growing and developing minds. By asking myself during each lesson how I can approach topics through the lens of multiculturalism, I can do my job in addressing multiple perspectives in each subject. One way that I can better understand my students' different cultural backgrounds and cultures is by doing home visits at the start of the school year. Research done by Mole and Associates shows that it is feasible and useful to have teachers visit households for research purposes. These are neither casual visits nor school business visits, but visits in which teachers assume the role of the learner, and in doing so help establish a fundamentally new, more symmetrical relationship with the parents of the student. By completing home visits, I will get a unique look into the lives of each of my students so that I am able to better understand their background and form a more solid relationship with them and their family members. Doing this will also help to eliminate any unconscious bias that I may have towards cultures other than my own. Research by the National Education Association explains that ethnic studies plays an important role in building a truly inclusive multicultural democracy and system of education. Incorporating ethnic studies into my curriculum will have great benefits for all of my students in my class by creating a classroom community that is inclusive and welcoming to all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed learning how my vision statement applies to what being culturally aware looks like for an elementary school teacher.